I just want to follow up on some of the discussion we had with the first panel. I brought up the firsthand accounts of private sector companies wanting to do business with the department and just, frankly, just not getting access. The two examples, one is a company that makes holographic maps that the Army is using. I wrote 3 letters to help facilitate that kind of a meeting, and they're not even responding to me. They can't get in the door, even in spite of the fact that Border Patrol looked at these maps and really liked them and recommended to Washington that they look at procuring these maps. Another instance, guy that basically they have a device that can detect heartbeats, which could be used in a lot of instances, and it can be used down the border too to look at human trafficking. It was originally designed by the federal government, this science, and this individual can't get a meeting. We heard from Dr. O'Toole, but basically her response to that was, gee, I guess I'll respond to your letter, but also, we're just too small. The private sector is a big industry, and our office is just too small to accommodate facilitating these kind of meetings. I just find that to be inadequate in my judgment. And Mr. Williams and Mr. Pearl, do you have any comments on that?
I do, Congressman. I think the stories you told are all too typical of dealings with DHS over the past few years, and I think it's very sad that they don't understand the benefits of engaging with the private sector, hearing about new ideas that could save money, could improve their mission, and I think it also goes to the attitude of individuals and a culture to kind of close the doors, and I believe, as we've all talked about, DHS needs to engage the private sector. They need to do it throughout the process, and they need to do it in a very open and collaborative fashion. That's not happening today. Mm-hmm. I did, after the first hearing, went outside, talked to Nick Nyack, and he said, that's unforgivable, that you had to write 3 letters that were not responded to. I think he's trying to change things, but again, as people have talked about, you've got a lot of different procurement offices there, and I think some of them are just ridiculously gun-shy about talking to the private sector. Mm. And my experience in government is the only way you're successful is if you engage everyone. And it isn't a matter of time or people. You can make the time to do these right things. They just don't do it.
I tend to agree with you on that. Mr. Pearl, do you have any comments?
I rather than speaking to any one particular technology, this is something that I've seen for 15 or 20 years in Washington when I started. In fact, I was at the Tech America when it was called ITAA, 16 years ago, and it was never about, and should not be about, an individual company trying to get its foot in the door. What I was speaking to was, in point of fact, a process, a blueprint, so that whatever the company is, whether it's a major company, a large company, or whether it's a small garage company that is entrepreneurial, you shouldn't build and avoid. And though I have the greatest technology for X or the wonderful process for Y, if in fact the department doesn't want it, and I'm not saying that they do or don't want the kinds of things that you talked about, but if the department doesn't want it, then why am I building this in the first place? Because I think it's going to help at the border, or I think it's going to help at cargo or in emergency management or whatever it is. And so what we're talking about is this engagement before an individual company comes into the door and says, I've got the greatest, whiz-bang technology that you've ever seen, and their response is, well, I don't know if we're going to use it, when it would be deployed, whether I have the money for it. There should be this dialogue that both Jim and I are talking about that speaks to the issue of, let's talk about a blueprint. What is our mission goal? Not what's checking the box, what are we going to try to procure for $100,000 here or $100 million there or $1 billion over down the road. We're trying to look at the broader component. All we've gotten thus far is these things that are called, for example, a QHSR or a bottoms-up review, the kind of quadrennial review. That's not a blueprint. That's everyone commenting on what should be. What we're looking for are lessons learned that exist in other agencies. And it shouldn't be in a void, not only in what DHS is about, but what they could learn from other independent agencies or DOD or DOE. That's what we've been encouraging, that kind of dialogue, not only with industry, but across intra-government so that you can learn what the processes are within our department that's 8.5 years old. You know, the evolution is continuing, but we need to kind of move forward and stop, you know, saying we know it all, we've got it all down, and fighting the last war. It's giving industry and government an opportunity to look ahead of the curve.
And just to follow up, Mr. Pearl, you talked about leveraging existing technologies rather than just starting from scratch. Like SBI Net's a good example of that. I took Bartkowski, who does a lot of the procurement and science and technology. Henry Quare and I took him down to the border, and because the Defense Intelligence Agency had sensor surveillance equipment that had already been produced. The R&D had been paid for by the taxpayer. They're using this actually currently in Afghanistan on the Pakistan border, sensor surveillance technology. And yet it's classic federal government. The left hand doesn't know what the right's doing. We had to make that introduction to him and brought him down on the border, and he looked at what the DoD had to offer, and he liked it. And he's starting to procure it and deploy it. But that's just one example of not only, of technology that exists within the federal government that's not being leveraged, but then you look at the private sector too, and there's so much of this technology out there that is not existing technology that's not being properly leveraged, in my view. And it would, I think the end result is not only can you be more effective and it can be deployed more quickly, but it's also more cost effective from this standpoint of the taxpayer.
You would think that. I mean, I think, that's what we certainly in the private sector and what Mr. Williams and I are talking about. This dialogue is absolutely necessary. One of the things that the council is going to be doing later this fall is bringing a group on a kind of fact-finding executive tour mission down to the southwest border. And we have developed not only relationships with DHS to develop this kind of dialogue, but we are bringing DOD and North Command into what's going on, U.S. Army North, and working very closely with Commanding General Swan, and try to get they kind of talk, but to be that kind of triangulation of making sure that the DOD and the DHS and the industry are all in the same room talking about what those future plans are, whatever leveraging we can do for tech services, for technology, for personnel, across the board. I think everybody wants to be there to help. They're all just kind of doing it on their own, and we have to kind of develop that more in a coordinated, communicated, collaborative way.
Yeah, Mr. Williams?
I would just say, Congressman, I think what you're talking about is strategic sourcing, which is how do you leverage that buying power, leverage what's already out there. And DHS has way too much of the same people buying the same thing, but at different components. And whether it's getting it from Department of Defense, or just combining their buying power, or combining their vehicles with other government vehicles, they don't do enough of that. And I think that's true across the government, but particularly DHS, which has not really formed a cohesive whole as a procurement organization. There are a bunch of different stovepipes, and I think they need to find a way to establish the processes that bring them together so that they can leverage the existing technologies from the private sector, existing vehicles and technologies that exist within DHS and across the government. And I would say, if I had to guess what percentage of DHS's budget that they strategically source that they could, I would say it's less than 1%, that they could do something better about that other 99%.
Well, I certainly hope, I know someone at the department is watching this hearing. I hope they are listening. These are great lessons to be learned, and I think it would make DHS more effective, and it would save the taxpayer a lot of money. And thank you for your interest in this, your hard work. I think this is an area that needs a lot of improvement, and I look forward to working with all of you.